Hey guys, this is Danny Wu here. Welcome to week 10 of creative coding. So in this video, we are going to be covering how to use the keyboard to affect different things in P5. So keyboard events essentially. So last week we talked about using mouse events, so on mouse press and following the cursor and using that as like a drawing tool to create your own brushes. Today we are going to be talking about how to use keyboard events, key presses, and key codes to control certain things on your P5 sketch with the keyboard. So today we are going to be talking about a few different variables. keyIsPressed, keyCode. There's a few variables that can be assigned to keyCode other than the numerical value that's assigned by default to every key. There's up arrow, down arrow, left arrow, right arrow, backspace, shift, and delete. And we're also going to be talking about two different functions that come standard with P5 when it comes to key events. There's the keyPressed function and keyReleased function. Then there's also two functions that we could talk about too when it comes to the drawing functions. There's no loop and loop. So no loop basically stops the draw function from looping through the code, and loop just continues that draw function from looping through all that code. Cool. So the first project that sketch that we're gonna look at is using the keyTyped function. So for this, we aren't going to be using the draw function at all. We want to keep it there just so so that the program knows that we're looping through code and that we're running through this endlessly. But we're going to keep that empty, and we're just going to use the keyTyped function for this. So basically what this is doing is in setup, I have my canvas, my background color, a fill that's being applied to any shapes that are being drawn to the stage, and then a text size and text align that's going to be applied to the text function in the keyType function. In keyTyped, we just have a background color, and then a text function that's going to pass in the key value, the key variable, which is just going to give us the key that we're pressing on the keyboard. And we're just going to take that value, that key, and we're going to display it on our canvas, on our stage, just in the center of the screen, or center of the canvas. So let's go ahead and open up our web editor in P5 and start putting that together. So make sure you're logged in, and we are going to create a new sketch. And right off the bat, obviously, as you guys are well aware at this point, P5 gives us a setup with a canvas in it and a draw function with a background in it, background color in it. We're not going to use the background, or we're not going to use the draw loop at all, since we're just going to be using the keyTyped function. So we could delete the background in draw, but you want to leave draw there just so it knows that we're looping through this code an infinite number of times. Then in setup, I'm just going to set up my sketch. We can keep it at 400 by 400, that's fine. Let's do a background color of black. Let's do a fill of white. And let's do a text size 300. And a text alignment center. Great. And let's just run the sketch, make sure it's working properly. Okay, so we have our canvas, black background. So that works. So far, so good. So after draw, we're going to create a new function. And this is a standard function that comes as a part of P5's library called keyTyped. And this is just going to detect whenever something is typed on the keyboard. and then we can take the value of whatever that key is and apply it to something. So I'm going to create a background in keyTyped. So we basically are covering up the previous frame. So we don't want to see all the different letters popping up. And then I'm going to use the text function to draw that key onto the stage, onto the canvas, using the key variable that again comes standard in P5. So if we just type key, then I'll say, okay, you're pressing on an S, you're pressing on a T, you're pressing on a J, etc. Whatever key we're pressing on. And then we're going to place that just in the center of the screen, center of the canvas, width divided by 2 and height divided by 2. I'm going to offset the height divided by 2 by positive 75 to account for the height of the text, the letter form. Okay, so that looks good. So now if we press play, go back to the keyboard, and let's say we press F. Press F, and then F shows up on the screen because we're using the keyTyped function and using the key variable to detect what key we're pressing. We could do, let's do P. Let's do Shift A, capital A. Let's see if we could do caps locks. Cap lock, L, K, J. Great, looks good. So that is how we can get detect the keys that we're pressing on the keyboard, or if we're pressing any keys at all. And then using the key variable that comes again standard with P5, we can take that value, whatever key we're pressing, and then apply it to something on the screen. So if you wanted to, for instance, recreate or build your own text editor, you can build your own text editor using this method too. Awesome. Okay, so the next sketch that we're going to play around with, and the next variables that we're going to play around with, are keyIsPressed and keyCode. So keyIsPressed is basically very similar to keyTyped, but instead of using a function, we could use it as a variable or a Boolean, essentially. So it's basically asking a true or false statement. Is the key pressed? Are any of the keys pressed on the keyboard? If it's yes, then we can go in here, else we go in here. And then we could also say, okay, if the key is pressed and the specific key, in this case, every key on the keyboard has a numerical value associated to it. In this case, 65 represents the key A on the keyboard. So if key is pressed, so if we're pressing down on the key, and keyCode equals 65, and we're pressing down on the A key, then we want to draw this ellipse on the screen. Else, if we're not pressing on any keys, or if we're not pressing on the A key, then it's going to be a rectangle drawn on the screen. Great. So let's go ahead and go back to our editor. And I am going to delete everything we just did and go back to just having a background. We could have a fill. Oops, turn the caps lock off. We could have a fill of 255. So this ellipse and rectangle are going to be white on a black background. And let's do a rect mode center, just so the ellipse and rectangle are being drawn, both being drawn from the center point by default. Okay, so now in draw, let's stop this old sketch. So now in draw, we are going to first draw background. We don't want to see every single frame. So it's going to be a black background. And then we want to basically just ask a question using an if statement. So if something happens, then do something else, do something else. Okay. So the question we want to ask is if a key is pressed, then do something. So let's do that first. So say if key is pressed. So for Booleans, you could say, if you just say key is pressed, then it's going to assume that it's true. You could also say equals true. So doing this and just writing key is pressed is the same exact thing. So just key is pressed is kind of shorthand for key is pressed is equal to true. So I'm going to do the shorthand. So if key is pressed is equal to true, then we want to do something in here. Let's just do that for now. So let's do an ellipse. It's going to be drawn at the center point, width divided by 2, height divided by 2, and let's make it 200 by 200. So if key is pressed is false, then we want to draw a rectangle at the same location, width divided by 2, height divided by 2, same size too, 200 by 200. Okay, let's try that first. Okay, so automatically we get a rectangle. So if I'm not pressing any keys, then it's going to be a rectangle. If I press a key, any key, it's going to be ellipse. If I press J, it's going to be ellipse. If I press an L, it's going to be an ellipse. If I press a P, it's going to be ellipse. But otherwise, if I don't press anything, it's going to be a rectangle. You could also do Shift S, and it's going to be an ellipse. So as long as any key is pressed down, it's going to be an ellipse. Let's say we want to be a little bit more specific with this. So instead of just doing if key is pressed equals true, then we also want to say, okay, and keyCode equals 65. So again, let me just do a little comment up here. 65 is the key code for the letter A, or the key A. So now if I run the sketch, if I press L, it's still a rectangle. If I press K, still a rectangle. If I press A, then it turns into an ellipse. If I do Shift A and release A, but I keep holding Shift, then it stays. But if I release Shift and A, then it goes back to a rectangle. So again, press A, it will be an ellipse. If you press anything else, then it will just stay a rectangle. So that is keyIsPressed and keyCode. So the next thing we're going to play around with is taking the values, the keyCode values, and mapping those values to something else. So in this case, we're going to map the value of the number keys, which from 1 to 9 go between 49 and 57 for their key codes values. So we're going to take those values and remap them to be go around a full 360 degrees and apply that angle to a rectangle that we're going to rotate in a circular format. All right, so let's go back to our web editor, and I am going to again start from scratch. So let's delete everything that's in draw except for background. We could keep background. And in setup, let's keep everything as is. So we're going to have the create canvas, the background color, the fill, and the rect mode stays at center. And then we're going to also add a no stroke, just to keep it clean. Okay. So the other thing we want to do to initialize this, to start it off, is create a variable for an angle. So var angle at the top, and then we want to set that to be equal to 0 initially. And then we're going to change that as we press our number keys, so 1 through 9. So in our draw function, we have our background already, because we don't want to see every single thing again. And the next thing we want to do is let's draw a rectangle. at 0, negative 100, 20, 20 for the width and height. And let's translate this to be starting from the center point of the canvas. So that's width divided by 2 and height divided by 2. So let's run that sketch. Okay, so we are translating this rectangle to start drawing from the center point, and then we are moving the rectangle to be 0 on the x-axis and negative 100 on the y-axis. So that's why it's located there. So we're going to rotate this based off of the key presses for the numerical values. So let's do a rotate function. And I'm going to use the radians function. And then we're going to pass in that angle value for the variable up here that we created. So again, it's not doing anything yet. It's just one value of 0. So now it's not rotating at all. Even if we press the keys, nothing's happening. So to do that, to fix that, we can use an if statement. Again, we basically want to ask a question. We want to ask to see if, again, key is pressed. So if key is pressed, then we want to do something. We want to update that angle. But we also want to use the just the numerical the number keys on the keyboard. So we are also going to say, okay, if key is pressed equals true, and I'm going to put these in parentheses too. keyCode is greater than or equal to 49, and keyCode is less than or equal to 57. Let's make this a little bigger. Okay. So this is basically just asking if the number keys are pressed, and then do something. So the number keys, I believe this is 1 through 9, it might be 1 through 0, are between, the codes are between 49 and 57. So that's why we're using these keyCode values. Okay, and then in here we're going to apply those values to the angle. So let's just apply the value of the keyCode first and see what happens. Okay. Alright, so let's press 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Okay, so it's 1 through 9. So as you can see, if I toggle between 1 and 9, it's jumping a little bit because the angle is, the value is going to be 49 to 57. So this is jumping from 49 degrees to 57 degrees, essentially. When I click on 1, it's 49. Click on 9, it's 57. But let's say we want to map this to go around the full 360 degrees evenly. So instead of just applying keyCode to angle, we can use the map function. And the map function allows us to pass in the value. So the keyCode is the value that we're currently on. And then we could pass in the minimum and maximum, the original minimum and maximum, which is between 49 and 57. And then change that to be between 0 and 360 degrees. So we have to define, okay, the original is 49 to 57, and then we want to change that, remap it to be between 0 and 360 degrees. So now if we run the sketch, press 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, it goes all the way around the circle and divides it evenly in quadrants. Great. Awesome. So that's how you can use map to apply those values to something. All right, so that is using mapping function, the mapping function, to apply the key-coded values to something like rotating a rectangle around a center point. But obviously you would probably want to be more creative with your sketches rather than just doing that. So the last thing I want to talk about is how to use key events to modify movement on your sketch on the canvas. So this is going to basically allow us to use the allow us to use the arrow keys on the keyboard to control the movement of, in this case, a rectangle flying across the screen. So you can kind of think of this as like controlling a car or a spaceship, and the movement that it creates. So we are going to create a variable for our x and y, a variable for our move value, which is basically like speed, is going to be equal to 2. And then this is just a variable for our size. So this will help us more easily allow us to bring the rectangle back onto the screen if it goes off the screen. So in setup, everything's basically the same as the last couple of sketches, but we are defining x and y, initializing x and y as being x as width divided by 2 and y as height divided by 2. So essentially the rectangle is just going to start in the center of the screen. Then in draw, again, we're going to draw a background every single frame so we don't see a streak in the background. We don't see every single frame being drawn. And then these are just a couple if statements saying if the up arrow key is pressed, then we want to move it up. Down arrow, we want to move it down. A left arrow, we want to move it left. Right arrow, we want to move it right. And these if statements at the bottom are just saying if the rectangle goes off the screen, either at the top, bottom, left, or right, then we're going to bring it back onto the screen on the opposite side of where it went off. And the bottom is just drawing that rectangle, applying the x and y variables, and then the size, that s variable as well, which we defined at the top. Cool. So let's go ahead and go to our web editor and run that sketch, put that sketch together. So I'm going to delete everything but the background and draw, and I'm going to delete that angle variable at the top, and replace it with some new variables. So var x and y. So we're initializing, or we're creating them up here, but we're going to initialize them in setup because we want to use width and height to define where it's going to initially start from. And then var move value, which again is just like speed. It's going to be equal to 2. You can increase that or decrease it if you wanted to go faster or slower. Then var s is going to be the size, and that can be equal to, again, anything you want, but I'm just going to do 20. Stop that sketch. Okay, so now in setup, we could keep everything that we had from the last example. The only thing we're going to add here is give x a value of width divided by 2, and y a value of height divided by 2. Great. So let's just draw the rectangle first on the stage. We're just going to apply x, y, s, and s for the location and size. Okay, so we have our rectangle. It's being drawn on the screen in the center location, which is where we want it. That's what we initialized x and y to be, right in the center. Okay, so now if we wanted to make this object move, then basically all we have to do is update the x value or the y value or both whenever we go through the draw loop, or whenever we click on one of the arrows in this case. So this just requires a bunch of if statements. So I'm going to do this shorthand, so it's just a little bit cleaner. So if keyCode equals up arrow. So remember with P5, there are a couple variables that come standard with the library, like up arrow, down arrow, backspace, delete, shift, etc. Or you could just type that rather than typing in whatever numerical value is assigned to that particular key on the keyboard. So if keyCode equals up arrow, then we want to update y to be y minus equals move. So we're taking the existing value of y and subtracting the move value, so it goes up on the screen. So let's see if that works. So if we run the sketch and then hit the up arrow, then it goes up. Great. So that's the only one that we've created so far, so we just have to do the same thing for the others. So if keyCode equals down arrow, then y plus equals move. Okay, let's try that. So up goes up, down, arrow goes down, up, arrow goes up, down, arrow, it goes down. All right, let's do the X and Y axis now. So if keyCode equals left arrow, then X minus equals move. If keyCode equals right arrow, and X plus equals move. All right, let's try that out. So up arrow, down arrow, left arrow, right arrow. Great. Oh, okay. So that works, but if the rectangle goes off the screen at all, then it's just going to continuously go in that direction until we click the arrow in the other direction. So to prevent that, we can basically just add some more if statements saying, okay, if the rectangle is off the screen, then we want to bring it back on the screen. So let's go ahead and do that. So if x, the value of x is greater than width plus s, and just give it some, so if it's fully off the screen, then x equals minus s. All right, so this is saying when the rectangle goes off to the right side of the screen, then we're going to redefine the x value to be negative s, so it's going to start back on the left side again. So let's try that. So if we go to the right, then it should pop back on the screen again. Okay, great. So we have it working if it goes off the right side, but we have to do the left side, the top and the bottom now. So let's do if x is less than negative s. So if it goes off the left side, then x equals width plus s. Then it comes back on the right side. And then same for top and bottom. So if y is greater than height plus s, so if this goes off the bottom, then y equals negative s and starts on the top. If y is less than negative s, if it goes off the top, then y equals height plus s. Comes back on the bottom. All right, so let's try top. Awesome. Let's go back to the bottom. Great. Let's go left. Awesome. Let's go right. Perfect. looks good. So now it'll always stay on the screen, but we can control the movements with the arrows. Up key, right key, left, down, up. So you can make your own snake game or car racing game or, I don't know, Space Invaders game using this method. Great, so that's all I got for the keyboard events. Again, everything, all this code can be found on the class website and on GitHub. So feel free to look at the code and take it and tweak it and make it your own. Like always, feel free to email me if you have any questions, or add comments to the YouTube channel, or Slack me if you have any questions. So that is it for keyboard events. Next we'll be playing around with image imports in P5.js. Great, thanks. Bye.